One of the most interesting things about the first day of the season one of 2021 MDI Cup was the crazy versatility that we saw coming out of all the Disc Priest players, and the fact that within just 4 matches we saw Disc Priest play all 4 covenants was really interesting to me, because there was definitely a question in my mind personally about where we were going to get our Necrolord covenant in particular, in some of these keys. I knew Disc Priest could play Venthyr, but the fact that we even saw Necrolord and even Night Fae coming from the Disc Priest was really interesting. So I just wanted to take a kind of a little bit less structured video and just sort of talk about it a little bit. So to start off, though, we'll start off talking about Venthyr Disc Priests, and Venthyr Disc Priests are nothing new. As we see on Radar.io, in the top, we can't see the Chinese Disc Priests, but in the top 20 Disc Priests in the world, only one is Kyrian, and the other, whatever that is, 16, are Venthyr. They're all Venthyr, including one Mr. Modemode, who we see is playing in this clip for Does Gargoyle Stream. And in this, he is playing Kyrian. Now, Modemode is a pretty famous Disc Priest streamer. I really credit him personally with kind of popularizing Disc Priest towards the end of season 4 of BFA, where in the EU community he really started pushing really high keys as Disc Priest, which was considered an extremely off-meta healer in BFA, and he really, I think, brought attention to mainly 2 things. One, to the strength of mind control in the right situation, where in workshop keys he was absolutely blasting trash pulls by mind controlling some of the mobs, and with the power of the cooldown Rapture, which of course is a 1.5 minute CD, which makes Power Word Shield able to cast on targets that already have weakened soul, as well as it gives like massively increased shields. And when people were pushing really high keys on live servers, they realized that the power of the shields to prevent one-shots on such a short cooldown against, just really high damage boss abilities and stuff was very valuable. So Disc Priest had a unique combination of both Powered Barrier, which matched things like Aura Mastery from the Holy Paladins, but also Rapture on a 1.5 minute CD. So there was a lot of ability to prevent people from, completely getting one shot. And now, of course, priests also bring Power Infusion. So now Disc Priest is quite meta in the MDI, it seems. Almost every single dungeon run in day 1 was with a Disc Priest. So the Venthyr Disc Priests, I don't entirely question, even though Modemode calls Kyrian Bis for keys, and he is in fact in this video here playing Kyrian. But the reason that most Disc Priests play Venthyr on live servers is because in Raid, Venthyr is far superior, because it lines up with Spirit Shell ramps, and because of the meta regen in Raid is a huge deal, actually. But and also because on live servers, it's kind of hard to find someone who plays Venthyr. In the MDI, we saw some Unholy Death Knights, and Holy Paladins, and even a Vengeance Demon Hunter go Venthyr for the Covenant buffs. But most key groups will not have a Venthyr unless it's the healer. So a lot of healers, including like the #1 Mistweaver in the world, have rerolled Venthyr, which is shocking because Venthyr is very bad for Mistweaver. So the Venthyr Disc Priests did not surprise me. That was sort of to be expected. It's very similar to what you're going to see people playing on live servers. Mind Games does some good damage. It does give the Disc Priest mana back, which helps alleviate some mana issues. And the flipping on damage done to like healing is actually pretty good on Pride as well. The key group that I run with, we have a Shadow Priest, and he is Venthyr for PvP purposes. But when he Mind Games and throws like a Vampiric Brace on Pridefuls, he'll do 2.5k HPS pretty easily, and it actually makes it a breeze. So Mind Games is still a powerful button. So in this clip here, JB is playing Venthyr for the Covenant bonus, but also because it's a perfectly playable Covenant. So one that we actually don't see a ton of on live is Kyrian Disc Priest, though. And Kyrian Disc Priest, the real strength of it is these big AoE pulls. And it is a 3-minute cooldown, so it is significantly longer than the Venthyr, which is only on a 1-minute cooldown. And of course, Kyrian is a less desired Covenant because your Windwalker Monks are going to take that. Your Vengeance Demon Hunters are going to take Kyrian. So it's not like it's a Covenant that you're lacking on, right? It's not like a Covenant that you really need to find someone who's playing that in order to push, Necrotic Wakes and Spires of Ascension. But this clip here, I think this huge pull onto Halkis in this match between Perplex and P2's Angels really highlights the strength of Boon of the Ascended. So we see Ryson popping in here, and he starts spamming the AoE. He's slamming, and after it ends, based on the number of casts he gets off, it's going to do this big explosion here in a sec, and bam. And this whole time, all of that damage done by Boon of the Ascended is feeding into Atonement Healing. So he has a Power Word Radiance out. Everyone has that. And he is slamming big AoE damage, and the number of casts he gets, it does damage at the end. So we see 20 seconds into this pull, right, and with all of this trash and 32% of the boss HP in, Ryson, as a healer, has done 9k DPS, which is massive. That is, like, very, very basically the same as like a Holy Paladin would do with all of their burst CDs. And he's also done 6.3k HPS, right? So on a shorter cooldown than Ashen Hollow, actually, while still bringing some of the stuff we talked about, right, like the Rapture buttons, some of the utility of Power Infusion, which into your mage is super valuable, and Power Infusion alone puts Priest ahead of Paladin in damage. But in these big pulls, Kyrian, on a shorter cooldown than the Venthyr Paladins, is able to do super big damage, as we see here, right? He keeps up at 9k, and obviously the spell's not back up, but we skip later on into the boss, right? And cooldowns have well passed at this point, and he's going to end the boss at pretty close to 3,500, right? So 3.4k overall. But the main thing is that when they did the large pull, right, where it's the scariest part of the pull, he has an absurdly strong cooldown to bust through the big pack and, you know, heal his tank and heal everyone for whatever incidental damage goes out. So Kyrian, also very strong. You don't need the Covenant necessarily for, you know, being able to get the Covenant specific bonuses, but in the large pulls, it is far and away the strongest Covenant for Priest. So now we have a bunch of other clips of Ryson, actually, from the Plaguefall. So the Plaguefall was really surprising to me that Ryson played Necrolord, because Necrolord is not a Covenant that anyone recommends for Disc Priest, the same as Night Fae, just nobody recommends it. Everyone tells you go either Venthyr if you're a Raider or a PvPer, and Kyrian if you're like really hardcore about M+. But he's playing Necrolord in this dungeon. So, and what really surprised, and it's not so much surprising me that they wanted a Necrolord, but it did surprise me that they put it on their Priest, because it's significantly worse, in my opinion, than the other Priest Covenants, and they have a Unholy Decay who totally could have played Necrolord, but also the fact that they played the Necrolord and they didn't get as much use out of it. So one of the things I wanted to highlight here is that, oh, it closed, of course. The main things you're looking to get with the Necrolord Covenant bonus in this dungeon is the Pestilent Slimes. So these red slimes, there's one here, right inside Ica's room, and then there's one down up here when you go up down for the last boss. Those are the main ones because they give you they give you Rapid Infection. They give you 25% haste and an aura around the player who, you know, soaks up the slimes. You know, that's just how the Covenant bonus works in that dungeon. But you'll see here, as they're setting up for this big pull, they're down in the corner here, so it's a little bit awkward. But you can see he jumps forward and pulls his pack, and there is the red slime that they do not pull. And this goes on, right? They come back, and eventually it'll switch back to their PVs, and they do this large pull, right, with the boss. But they don't pick up the buff from the red slime. And what actually happens is they're going to kill everything. They're going to do all this. I actually just skipped past it. But you see Ryson is going to fleshcraft these green slimes. And these green slimes, from experience, I know, because as you can see here, I am a Necrolord. I play Necrolord for my keys group to have a Necrolord buff. These green slimes do almost no damage. I pick up the green slime more than he did in this run. I pick it up twice in the run, and it'll do something like 1% of my group's overall damage. It just doesn't do very much damage. So this is the first fleshcraft that I could find. I may have missed something, but he did not fleshcraft the red slime for sure. And these are the only other slimes so far in the dungeon. So he picks up a green slime there. Here, but outside the Ica's room, after they did some fancy tricks with these plague borers into the pride and stuff. Now he picks up this red slime for the boss. So that makes perfect sense, right? He's going to take this. They're going to run into the boss. They're going to have a 25% haste boost. Everything makes sense. Everything is great. But then they do not include in their route, which I understand because it's very time consuming once you drop down here to pull the 3 other slimes. Pulling these 3 other slimes is an incredibly lengthy process because they walk very slowly and they're very much out of the way. It's not super efficient. They don't pull it. So the entire dungeon, they only really get the 1 red slime that you want. So I'm not quite sure why they played Necrolord when they could have played Kyrian for some of these big, some of these big pulls. They could have played Venthyr. They could have played anything they wanted, but they chose Necrolord and they didn't get much out of it. So I was a little, excuse the pun, perplexed about why they played Necrolord in this dungeon. Yeah. So the last covenant here is going to be Night Fae. And it was interesting that it was in this match, actually, that Xaylia went Night Fae because against Curie for the quad ? Team, the Shadow Priest in this game and the Disc Priest in this game are both Night Fae. And once again, Night Fae is not a covenant that anyone recommends for Disc Priest, at least not that I can find, for Disc Priest or for Shadow Priest. And I've talked to my the Disc Priest in my guild who we are cutting edge raiders. He can't find a reason that you're playing Night Fae. The Shadow Priest that I play with can't find a reason you'd play Night Fae. Maybe someone recommends it, but I can't find anything that recommends it. So it's extremely unusual for someone to play Night Fae on Disc Priest or Shadow Priest. But there might have been a little bit of bug abusing. There's apparently some bug where a cosmetic in the game would shorten the cooldown on Shadow Fiend. So maybe they're abusing a little bit of that to get better Shadow Fiend or more Shadow Fiend usage. But the only reason that I can think of really to be Night Fae is that in an MDI setting, it actually makes a lot of sense. And the reason I say that is because in this setting, the Disc Priest is being played because you want Power Infusion for your mage, right? Or potentially for your Unholy Death Knight if your mage doesn't have cooldowns, right? But you want Power Infusion on your healer because it makes your healer an incredibly powerful support healer, essentially, right? Just purely to be there to buff the DPS so you can burn through some of these packs that otherwise would probably not be feasible, right? That extra huge burst of haste is just such a large injection of stats into these, DPS players that you can really power through some of these pulls. And Night Fae Priest really leans into that sort of supportive role. And the reason why is because of the ability Fae Guardian. So it's a 1.5 minute cooldown. You get 3 fairies essentially, and you can use each of these buffs once, essentially. So 1 is you increase the cooldown recovery rate of your major ability by 100%, and it follows your either Flashy or Shadow Men, depending on what spec you are. So basically, this gives 100% Ineffable Truth for 20 seconds, or you can reduce the damage taken by someone by 10% if you power or shield them, right? So my hypothesis, my theory, right, is that they're playing Night Fae because it allows them to get this cooldown reduction onto their mage, and they can get combust up even faster, right? Because mages are trying to operate on like a 1 minute window despite it's a 2 minute cooldown, but this allows them to really consistently hit that 1 minute timing. And I think that in a dungeon like this where they're speed running so hard, and for the first 5 minutes of the dungeon it is just chain big pulls onto shards of Halkias, right? And they're not dealing with Pridefalls, actually. They're shadow melding all of them, but like very quickly, very rapidly chaining these large, difficult pulls. I think that the Fae Guardians makes that more doable, right? With the cooldown reduction for your mage. So you can very consistently have combust up for these pulls, as well as the damage reduction from Power with Shield is actually not insignificant. So if we skip ahead to the 3rd boss in this dungeon, the way that they pull the 3rd boss in this dungeon is very scary. We see down in the bottom left, I think they're going to switch to it in a second, but they pull these 2 rooms outside of the 3rd boss all onto the 3rd boss. This is a very scary pull, and making sure that your mage, again, ensuring that your mage has combust, and the extra 10% damage reduction on your tank on top of these, we see the pain suppression that has gone out from Xaylia onto now, is very valuable, right? So I think that the Night Fae Priest might be kind of sleeper. We only saw Xaylia playing the Night Fae For the healers, Kiri did play it for the Shadow Priest, but for the healers, we only saw the Night Fae. And I have kind of a suspicion that in the dungeons that we don't need Venthyr, we might see more Night Fae priests in the future if people kind of pick up on this and they realize that it gives the cooldown, you know, what it actually gives to your mage, right? And being able to hit those timings more effectively, as well as, you know, enabling a little bit bigger pulls with the 10% damage reduction on your tank for a very long time as well. The description, the fairies follow your target for 20 seconds, which is like not insignificant. So Disc Priest is really cool. It's really unique that it can play all these covenants and it can, you know, fill all these roles for these MDI teams. So their DPS players can kind of work with what's actually best for them. And, you know, of course, leave it to the healer to fill in the gaps. But my sneaking impression is that we're going to either see, if we continually see big pulls that the healers want to contribute more to, we'll see lots of Kyrian in the future when we don't need a Venthyr bonus. And if we see anything else, I think Night Fae might make kind of a splash. I don't anticipate more Necrolord and Plaguefall. I just don't think it's worth it. It just doesn't really do anything in the dungeon. Theater of Pain, on the other hand, we could very well see, but unfortunately, we have not seen a Theater of Pain as of the time of recording this because we only have 1 day of games, and the Theater of Pain was skipped because the final series of the day was a 2-0. So, all right, thank you guys for watching. Hopefully that was informative, a little bit of information on some of the Disc Priest Covenant choices, and I will see you all in the next video.